Mira stared at the list her mother-in-law slammed on the table. 50 guests, 13 dishes, and not a single helping hand. "You're the wife now. Prove you belong here," she said coldly. Mira looked down at her scarred palms and whispered, "They think I'm here to serve, but they'll never forget what I served them." That was the moment she stopped being a daughter-in-law and became a woman who would change everything. Mira had always believed that love was enough. She came from a small town called Mbale, where people were kind and simple. When she married Nico, she thought her life was finally beginning, filled with happiness, laughter, and respect. But from the moment she stepped into Nico's family house, things changed. His family was rich and proud, and they looked down on Mira. To them, she was just a poor village girl, not good enough for their son. Everything boiled over the night before the family's big annual feast. It was a grand event where important guests would come, and the food had to be perfect. Mira's mother-in-law walked in, handed her a long list, and said, "You will cook for 50 people, alone, 13 different dishes. No help, no rest. Just do it." Mira looked at the list with wide eyes. Her heart pounded. She had never cooked such a big feast by herself before, but more than fear, she felt the sting of being treated like a servant in her own home. Her sisters-in-law laughed in the corner, whispering and mocking her. Nico stood there, silent. He didn't defend her. He didn't stop them. He didn't even look at her. At that moment, Mira knew this was more than just about food. This was a test, a cruel way to break her. But instead of crying, she took a deep breath and walked to the kitchen. Her hands were already hurting from cleaning and chopping all week, but she didn't stop. She told herself, "They think I'm here to serve them, but they will never forget what I serve." And with that, the fire in her heart burned stronger than the fire on the stove. By the time the sky was still dark and quiet, Mira was already up. It was 3 in the morning. The whole house was asleep, but she was in the kitchen, her hands moving quickly. She started by chopping onions, pounding spices, washing meat, and preparing every ingredient with care. Her eyes were tired, her back was aching, and her hands were sore, but she kept going. There was no one to help her, no one to even offer her a glass of water. It was just her, alone in that big kitchen. But she wasn't weak. They thought she would cry, break down, or even run away. They didn't know the kind of girl Mira was. Her sisters-in-law stood on the balcony above, drinking tea and giggling. They were watching her like she was a show. "She'll cry by noon," one of them whispered. Another one laughed and said, "She won't last till lunch." They thought this was funny. To them, it was a game, a tradition to test the new bride. But to Mira, this was something deeper. This was her moment to show them who she really was. What they didn't know was that Mira had grown up in a village where festivals were grand and food was made with love and strength. Since she was a teenager, she had helped cook for hundreds of people. She knew how to handle big meals. She knew how to manage time, flavors, and fire. While they laughed, she calculated. She didn't just cook. She made a plan in her head. She knew which dish took the longest, which one needed to rest, and which one would impress the guests the most. She stayed calm. She worked with focus. Every sound of chopping, every sizzling pot, every spoon she stirred had purpose. She was sweating, but she didn't complain. She was tired, but she didn't stop. Because Mira wasn't just cooking. She was building something. Every hour she spent in that kitchen was not for them. It was for herself. To prove she didn't come to beg for a place in the family. She came to create her own space. And though they tried to break her spirit with this so-called tradition, they didn't realize they had handed her the perfect stage to shine. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just cooked, quietly, strongly. Her mother once told her, "Let your food speak when your voice cannot." And that's exactly what Mira was doing. Not with anger, but with fire in her heart and power in her hands. As the sun slowly rose, filling the kitchen with a soft golden light, Mira was still standing, still cooking. Her hands moved gently, yet with strength, as she stirred the pot of jollof rice. The aroma filled the air, tomatoes, peppers, spices dancing together in the heat. But it wasn't just food, not for Mira. Every time she turned the spoon, memories filled her heart. She saw her mother's warm face, smiling in their small kitchen back in Mbale. Her mother used to say, "Food speaks louder than pride." And today, Mira finally understood what that meant. Every insult her mother-in-law had thrown at her, every mocking laugh from her sisters-in-law, Every time Nico kept quiet when he should have spoken up. All of it burned inside her, but she didn't let it crush her. Instead, she poured all that pain into her cooking, the way she measured salt, the way she fried the meat, the way she added just a touch of nutmeg to the puff puff. It was like telling a story, her story, a story of strength, of silence, of surviving with grace. She wiped the sweat off her forehead with the back of her hand. Her fingers were red from the heat, her legs shaking from standing for so long, but her eyes were clear, full of focus. She wasn't just making jollof rice, she was writing her feelings into every dish. She was turning her emotions into flavor. Every spoon of stew was mixed with memory. Every bite of suya carried her dreams. She cooked with her soul, not just her hands. The kitchen that once felt cold and heavy now felt like home to her. It was hers, at least for that moment. She moved between pots and pans like she was dancing, calm, proud, full of quiet fire. Her food was not just to fill stomachs. It was meant to open eyes, touch hearts, and maybe even change minds. The same people who looked down on her would soon taste something they'd never forget. And when they did, they wouldn't just taste tomatoes or pepper. They would taste Mira, all of her. She didn't need applause. She didn't need praise. All she needed was that one chance to be seen, really seen. Not as the quiet village girl who married into a rich family, but as the woman who brought magic to the table. And so, with every stir, every sprinkle of spice, Mira cooked not for approval, but for power. A quiet power, a woman's power, the kind you don't shout about, the kind you feel deeply with every single bite. The feast began slowly. The long tables outside the family house were finally filled. The guests sat, smiling, chatting, ready to eat. They didn't know who had cooked. They thought it would be just another family meal, nothing special. But the moment the first plates landed on the table, the mood started to shift. People looked at their plates. Golden puff puffs with something creamy inside, suya that glistened with a sweet mango glaze, egusi soup that smelled smoky and rich. One by one, spoons went into mouths, then everything changed. At first there was silence, a deep, curious silence. People blinked, chewed slowly, looked around. Someone raised an eyebrow. Another took a second bite, faster this time. Then came the whispers. This suya, it's different. Who cooked this? The egusi, it tastes like firewood and love. This puff puff, is that coconut cream inside? Heads began to turn. Murmurs filled the air. The silence broke, and in its place came something powerful, praise. Everyone was talking now, smiling, laughing, eating like they hadn't eaten in days. The dishes weren't just tasty, they were unforgettable. Every flavor told a story of someone who had cooked with her whole heart. Then someone asked the question loud enough for others to hear. Who made this food? The question hung in the air like a drumbeat. Mira's mother-in-law, who had been sitting proudly at the head of the table, froze. Her spoon stopped mid-air. She didn't answer. Her face changed. Surprise, then confusion, then something close to fear. She had expected Mira to fail. She had planned for Mira to be embarrassed, maybe even cry. But now, the spotlight was shifting. All eyes were looking around, searching for the mystery chef. And Mira, she stood at the back, still in her apron, hands slightly burnt, face tired, but eyes glowing. Her sisters-in-law, the same ones who laughed at her just hours before, now sat quietly, too stunned to speak. They hadn't imagined this. They didn't think the village girl could do something so beautiful, so perfect. Even Nico, who had been silent all day, looked at Mira with new eyes, eyes that were finally seeing her for who she was. Not just his wife, not just the girl from Mbale, but the woman who had just silenced a house full of proud people with food. Mira didn't walk forward. She didn't need to. Her food had already spoken, and everyone was listening. The mayor of the town was sitting at the high table, quietly enjoying the food like everyone else. At first, he didn't say much. He just took small bites, nodding slowly, his face serious. But then he tasted the coconut curry. He stopped. He put down his spoon, sat up straighter, and looked around with wide eyes. Everyone nearby noticed the change in his face. He stood up slowly, clearing his throat. The room fell silent again. Who cooked this meal? The mayor asked loudly, holding up his plate of curry. Who is the chef behind this magic? People looked around. All eyes turned toward Mira, who was standing quietly at the back, still in her cooking clothes, unsure if she should step forward. But someone pointed at her, then another. Finally, Mira took a small step forward. Her heart was beating fast. Her fingers were still red from all the chopping and frying, but she walked slowly toward the mayor. When she got close, the mayor smiled and stretched out his hand. "Young lady, you are truly gifted," he said. "This is not just food, this is art." Mira shook his hand shyly, not believing what was happening. Then, right there in front of everyone, the mayor pulled out his business card and handed it to her. "I want you to cater for my daughter's wedding," he said. "Full contract. Name your price." The room exploded with claps. People stood up, cheering, smiling, shouting words of support. Mira's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined this kind of moment. And Nico, he sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, completely shocked. This was not the shy, quiet girl he married. This was a powerful woman, making a name for herself in front of everyone. His sisters couldn't say a word. His mother looked away, her pride now swallowed by silence. Mira, the girl they tried to break, was now being celebrated by the whole town. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. The mayor's words, the claps, the smiles, they said it all. Mira had arrived. After the applause faded and people returned to their meals, Mira's sisters-in-law slowly came forward, trying to smile like they had been kind to her all along. One of them laughed nervously and said, "Well, we helped a bit here and there." Another quickly added, "Yes, we guided her." It was a team effort, really. But before they could say more, a guest from one of the nearby tables stood up and interrupted them. "No, that's not true," he said. "I was here since morning. That girl cooked everything alone. We all saw her working non-stop, while you sat and watched from the balcony." More guests nodded in agreement. One woman said, "I passed by early and saw her outside grinding peppers. Her hands were shaking, but she kept going. No one helped her." The sisters-in-law had nothing to say. Their smiles faded quickly, and they looked down, pretending to be busy with their drinks. Mira stood quietly, watching them. She didn't need to say a word. Everyone already knew the truth. Her mother-in-law, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. Her voice was cold, her face stiff. "Well, maybe she just got lucky today," she said, trying to sound in control. But her words were empty, and everyone knew it. Mira looked at her calmly. She didn't reply. There was no need. The empty plates, the claps, the mayor's praise, everything had already spoken for her. She didn't need to argue or defend herself. The pride that the family once wore like a crown was now heavy on their heads. They had tested Mira, hoping she would fail, but instead, she shone brighter than any of them expected. Some guests whispered, "She's stronger than they thought." Others said, "They tried to break her, but she rose." Mira didn't boast. She just smiled, her heart full. She knew she had done something powerful, not just with food, but with grace. And as the feast continued, the family that once looked down on her could now only bite their tongues, silently watching the girl they once called ordinary become unforgettable. That night, after all the guests had left and the house became quiet, Mira sat alone in the kitchen, tired but peaceful. Her hands were sore, her feet ached, but her heart felt strong. She had faced their test, and she had won with dignity. Nico walked in slowly. He looked unsure, almost like a little boy caught doing something wrong. He stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. Then finally, in a soft voice, he said, "Mira, I'm sorry." She looked at him, calm and quiet. He took a deep breath and added, "I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them. I saw how they treated you, and I stayed silent. That was wrong." Mira didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just gave him a small, tired smile and said, "You still can make it right. Don't ever let this happen again. Speak up next time, not just for me, but for what is right." Her words were simple, but they hit Nico hard. He realized she wasn't angry. She was wise. She wasn't begging for love or begging for respect. She had earned both, on her own terms. And in that moment, Nico saw her differently. She wasn't just the gentle girl he married from a small town. She was more. She was strength wrapped in kindness. She was courage in silence. She was fire behind a smile. She had become a mirror, showing him who he really was and who he needed to be. For the first time, Nico didn't see her as someone who needed protection. He saw her as someone who could stand tall beside him, someone who could teach him what real love and respect meant. He held her hand gently and said, "You're amazing." Mira didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than words. That night, Nico made a silent promise, not just to her, but to himself, to be better, to never stand in silence again. Because now, he knew, Mira wasn't just his wife, she was his mirror, his lesson, and his greatest gift. Weeks passed, and Mira's life began to change in a big way. After that family feast, her cooking became the talk of the town. People couldn't stop talking about the taste, the flavor, the magic in her food. It was like each dish told a story, and everyone wanted to hear more. Soon, neighbors started calling her for small events. Then, strangers reached out, then people from other towns. Before she knew it, her phone didn't stop ringing. Mira started her own catering business from her small kitchen. At first, it was just her, one stove, and a lot of heart, but the orders kept coming. Birthdays, weddings, naming ceremonies. Everyone wanted the woman who cooked like a poet. Her meals made people smile, laugh, and even cry with joy. There was something special in her food, something deep. It wasn't just the ingredients. It was her story, her strength, her love. One day, a TV producer who had tasted her food at a wedding called her. He said, "Mira, we want you to cook on live television." At first, she was nervous. She had never stood in front of cameras, but then she remembered what she had been through: mockery, long hours, burnt fingers, lonely tears, and she smiled. If she could survive that, she could do anything. On the day of the show, she wore a clean white apron with her name embroidered in gold, Chef Mira. When the cameras rolled, she didn't just cook, she shared her journey. She talked about her mother's words, the test from her in-laws, and how food saved her. People across the country watched with tears in their eyes and smiles on their faces. Soon after, her social media pages exploded. Orders doubled, then tripled. People started calling her not just a chef, but an inspiration. Young girls from small villages sent her messages like, "You made me believe I can do something too." Her story was shared online over and over. She wasn't just feeding people anymore, she was giving them hope. Now, Mira's small kitchen had become a workshop of dreams. She hired helpers, trained them with love and patience. She made sure her staff were treated with kindness, the same kindness she had once prayed for. Her husband Nico supported her every step. He became her biggest cheerleader, always smiling from the side as she signed new contracts and packed dishes for delivery. Mira had moved from the dark corner of a kitchen to the bright spotlight of success, but she stayed humble. She still thanked her mother in her prayers. She still made time to cook for the children on her street. And each time she wore her apron, she remembered the day they tried to break her and how she rose instead. One sunny morning, when the restaurant was still quiet and the air smelled like fresh bread and pepper soup, Mira looked up and saw someone standing at the door. It was her mother-in-law. She wasn't wearing her usual proud face. She looked nervous, even a little scared. Mira paused. For a second, it felt like the world stood still. Her mother-in-law walked in slowly, looking around at the beautiful place Mira had built. The clean walls, the smiling staff, the customers already waiting for their food. It all spoke of success. Mira didn't say anything at first. She just watched. Then her mother-in-law stopped in front of her and took a deep breath. "I was wrong," she said, her voice soft like someone finally removing a heavy load from their chest. "I judged you, I doubted you, but you are more than enough." Mira didn't smile, but her eyes were calm. She nodded gently and pointed to a table near the window. "Please sit." Her mother-in-law sat down quietly, still holding her bag tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Mira went into the kitchen. She didn't rush. She carefully made the same dish she had cooked during the feast, the one that made everyone go quiet, the one that had started everything. Suya with mango honey, egusi with a smoky twist, and puff-puffs with creamy filling. She placed them all gently on a tray and brought it out. She set the food on the table and said, "Taste it again," but this time, without bitterness. Her mother-in-law looked at the food, then at Mira. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say a word. She picked up the spoon and took a bite, then another and another. Halfway through, the tears finally escaped and rolled down her cheeks. She wept silently, the kind of tears that come not just from regret, but from being deeply moved. Around them, no one said anything. Even the staff stood still, watching the moment like it was a scene from a powerful movie. Mira didn't speak either. She just stood nearby, strong, calm, and kind. Not angry, not proud, just peaceful. Her mother-in-law wiped her eyes and whispered, "I don't deserve your kindness." Mira simply replied, "Sometimes we all need to taste our own silence." The older woman nodded slowly, then took another spoonful, as if trying to swallow her guilt with every bite. That day, Mira didn't just serve food. She served grace. She didn't raise her voice or ask for revenge. She let her growth, her success, and her quiet strength do all the talking. The apology was late, it came cold, but Mira received it with the same warmth she had always held inside her heart. And once again, her food did what words could never do. It healed. Mira's name began to spread like the sweet smell of her cooking. Quiet at first, then strong, everywhere. People didn't just come to her restaurant for food. They came for the feeling her meals gave. Comfort, warmth, respect. She didn't have to shout to be noticed. She didn't chase fame. It came to her, drawn by her strength, her story, and the magic in her hands. TV shows started calling her. Magazines wrote about her journey from a small kitchen corner to the spotlight. But Mira remained calm, humble, and kind. Even when cameras were on her, she still tied her apron the same way and stirred her pots with the same love. What made her different wasn't just her food, it was her heart. And whenever someone asked her, "How did it all begin?" she would smile, sometimes shake her head, and laugh softly. "It started with 50 mouths and no help," she'd say, "but a recipe they'll never forget." Because that day, when they tried to break her, she cooked with her pain. She turned their insults into spices, their mockery into flavor, and their silence into applause. That meal didn't just feed people, it changed how they saw her. Now, she didn't just cook meals, she served lessons. She taught everyone who heard her story that quiet people are not weak, that those who serve with love are stronger than those who lead with hate, and that true respect isn't demanded, it's earned, one plate at a time. Mira had become more than a chef. She was a symbol, a quiet fire that didn't burn, but warmed the world. And every time she lifted her spoon, she reminded people of one truth. Real power doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be real.